Skinny Puppy emerged as one of the most influential and groundbreaking industrial bands of the 1980s, forever changing the landscape of alternative music with their innovative approach to electronic sound, provocative performances, and later on in their career, socially conscious messaging. They were dubbed by the Chicago Tribune as a Transylvanian Captain Beefheart, having a breakdown in a steel mill. They later go on to influence the likes of Ministry and Nine Inch Nails. Today, let's talk about the band's first 3 LPs, and also let me know in the comment section if you want me to cover more Skinny Puppy on my channel. Before we get started, be sure to hit the bell notification icon and put all notifications on. I hear from a lot of my subscribers that they don't even get notifications when I post my videos. I would greatly appreciate if you guys did that. The story of Skinny Puppy begins in Vancouver, British Columbia, and Canada in 1982, when a musician named Kevin Crompton, who was drumming for the new wave synth pop band Images in Vogue, found himself increasingly dissatisfied with the commercial direction his band was chasing. Crompton had a vision of creating something more experimental and challenging, music that pushed boundaries rather than chasing trends that were getting played on local radio. Crompton, only a decade earlier, had played in a handful of trash rock bands with names like Bastille and Illegal Youth. Images in Vogue did achieve some popularity in Vancouver, getting played on local radio, and they even opened for groups like Duran Duran, Depeche Mode, and Roxy Music. They had a few releases that charted nationwide in Canada. But Crompton soon started a side project while he was still playing in Images in Vogue. That later evolved into his primary band. Crompton grew up being into groups and artists like Kraftwerk, David Bowie, as well as Genesis. It's just the flame, the bunch to keep me well. His side project started to gain steam when he met a guy named Kevin in 1982. The pair bonded over their love of all that's bizarre and mutant in music. To avoid the confusion of having 2 members named Kevin, they adopted stage names. Crompton became Kevin Key, and Ogre transformed into Ogre. Key was hanging out a lot at late night clubs in Vancouver, and he befriended a fellow musician named Bill Lieb through a girl he knew who was dating him. Lieb was really into underground music, and he introduced Key to groups like Throbbing Gristle, Cabaret Voltaire, and the pair got together and started talking about how these groups used minimal production on their rhythm side, but then they had the idea to make the rhythm front and center on the music they were working on. Lieb ended up joining Skinny Puppy a few years later. Key told the Phoenix New Times, "So all I did was take the ideas I liked about the underground sound and punk and put it with a heavier production. That immediately formed some sort of weird nightclubby accessible entranceway for Skinny Puppy because it started getting played in the dance clubs." The band's name was inspired by an emaciated dog that Key had seen one day in the street. He told the San Francisco Examiner, "We built a philosophy around that in our first song, Canine." Key had developed the name almost a year before and had already come up with a lot of songs before he asked Ogre to sing on them. Ogre fronted the group and played keys while Key did the guitar, bass, drums, and synthesizers. One of the first songs the group wrote was the track Sleeping Beast, about the breakup of Ogre's first marriage. 1982 was a particularly rough year for Ogre as his wife left him, his father died of cancer, and a record distribution company he set up with borrowed money had failed. While mainstream electronic music of the early 80s largely embraced polished production and pop sensibilities, Skinny Puppy deliberately moved in the opposite direction. In fact, so much of the press that the band received early in their career discussed how Skinny Puppy wasn't a band for everyone. They incorporated distortion, dissonance, unsettling samples, and creating soundscapes that were both challenging and immersive. Their approach was decidedly anti-commercial, reflecting what Key would later describe as the antithesis of, and I quote, the Bruce Springsteen mentality of music. The first live gig Skinny Puppy played took place at Univis Art Gallery in Vancouver in February of '84. A friend of the band who actually worked there left town for the day, And so the pair took his keys and broke into the venue and played an early morning show where approximately 300 people showed up. The members of Skinny Puppy were high on MDA during their performance. Some audiences got the band's music while others headed for the doors. Ogre told the state newspaper, "We don't expect a certain reaction. That's too totalitarian. At the best of times, I'd want audiences to react with a bit of expansion, saying, well, I really thought about something. But some people will react the opposite, laugh at us and say, this is bloody ridiculous." The band self-released their first EP titled Back and Forth in 1984. Tracks such as Sleeping Beast and Edge of Insanity demonstrated the band's fusion of dark ambient elements with synth pop and industrial flavors. There's differing accounts over how many copies actually exist, anywhere between 35 to just under 100. Ogre told the Chicago Music Guide, "We made under 100 copies of it and sold those kind of just through mail and word of mouth and got picked up by Nettwerk after that. It was Skinny Puppy's electric Vancouver shows that got them on the radar of Nettwerk Records, who they signed a deal with." Nettwerk Records actually came together by chance. A Vancouver-based band named Mauve was initially signed to a small label, but the company went belly up. So the band's manager set up a company called Nettwerk with the hopes of putting out Mauve's upcoming release. The label was notable because of its in-house design artist, Stephen R. Gilmore, whose artwork made the label's album stand out amongst the releases that major record labels put out in the record store. It seemed like a match made in heaven because when Skinny Puppy showed up to the label's office, they already had their iconic image and sound figured out, so Nettwerk thought that the band would be easy to market. For the group's first official Nettwerk release, they recruited Bill Lieb. Ogre told the Chicago Music Guide, "Our first release kind of came as a bit of a shock, and I think that kind of propelled it a bit forward as far as the Canadian press goes and things like that. And they've kind of picked up on it, and we did a video for our first single, and that was at a time when Much Music was kind of a burgeoning video channel. So they played it a few times. We started touring, and I think that's kind of when the word of mouth finally kind of connected. We never got much radio play. This little band has always been more about live performances and cult following in a way." Ogre was adamant in interviews that he didn't see Skinny Puppy as having a goal of being commercially successful. But in the early days, there was one thing that he kind of regretted, and that was how the message of his vocals wouldn't come through as they were hard to make out. And this is something that changed substantially in their subsequent years as they got more socially conscious. The group's early performances began establishing what would become Skinny Puppy's theatrical approach to live shows, combining music with visual elements to create immersive and often disturbing experiences. Key told the Toronto Star, "When we perform, we become possessed. It's something to do with us three particular people coming together and creating this kind of music, which creates a powerful spirit. Even without the theatrical elements, our music would be disturbing because we work with harmony and dissonance. We don't try to define our music with regular structures and progressions." Critics made note of the influences in the band's music, frequently pointing to shock rocker Alice Cooper, Euro-Gothic music Lou Reed, and Cabaret Voltaire, while also making note of their appearances. The members were skinny, pale white guys with hair that looked like palm trees in mourning. Ogre told the Winnipeg Sun, "I'd come to believe that hardcore punk stuff had a potent message, but a musical medium that most people couldn't handle listening to." In December of 1984, Skinny Puppy released their second EP, Remission. Remission featured what would become underground favorites like Smothered Hope and Far Too Frail, along with videos that got some play on the fledgling Much Music Network, which had launched earlier in the year. They also got some support from local radio station, University of British Columbia radio station CITR, and late night clubs like Mr. Toast, Club Soda, and the once gay club turned punk club Love Affair. The band soon teamed up with Dave Rave Ogilvie, no relation to Ogre, who worked on the band's first 7 records. The impact of Remission was significant both for the band and for Nettwerk Records. George Meniatis, Nettwerk's VP of A&R and Marketing, noted that the EP, and I quote, "grabbed everybody by the you-know-whats," and that the label became synonymous with industrial music. Remission was considered the hardest-hitting and ugliest EP released from the label to date. It actually turned a profit in Europe, convincing the label to issue an LP. The band were also notable because they were able to draw quite a few female and gay fans, with Key pointing to their association with images in Vogue and their androgynous style, as well as goth elements. He also pointed to Ogre's appearance and charisma as drawing those fans. Building on this momentum, Skinny Puppy released their first full-length album, Bites, in 1985. The record produced the underground hit Assimilate, which would become one of the band's signature songs and a staple in alternative clubs. 1986 marked a pivotal year in Skinny Puppy's development, both in terms of their lineup and their commercial reach. The band benefited from a distribution deal between Nettwerk and Capitol Records that helped them build their audience internationally. They went from being available in 200 to 1,700 stores in Canada, and also helping was US college radio. According to the San Francisco Examiner, the album climbed higher than any other previously released independent Canadian record on the US rock charts. Skinny Puppy during this time also expanded their reach in Europe. Capitol manager Stephen Powers noted that signing groups like Skinny Puppy gave the company real credibility with the alternative and college music scenes. The band underwent some significant changes though when Bill Leeb left the group to form his own project, Frontline Assembly. Leeb credited creative differences and the fact that he wanted to front his own group with his decision. His replacement, the introverted Dwayne Goette, who was a classically trained pianist, transformed the band's sound into a more industrial direction. Key remarked, "Dwayne's brought us a whole new sense and aesthetic that we didn't have. Up to that point, we were really punk rock in our approach," adding, "He had an incredible knowledge of equipment and at a very early stage was really the master of sampling, which had really just begun." The resulting album, Mine the Perpetual Intercourse, saw a release in 1986. The cover art drew the ire of Tipper Gore's organization, the Parents Music Resource Center. On the bright side, the British publication Melody Maker named it as one of the best releases of the year. Dig It was released as the first single, and it got some good exposure on MTV, and the group had another minor hit with Stairs and Flowers. Years later, Trent Reznor revealed that Nine Inch Nails' song Down In It from the group's first album, 1989's Pretty Hate Machine, was inspired by Dig It. While Skinny Puppy was benefiting from more exposure, the tour to support the record was difficult. Key later admitted that they had bad business people they were dealing with, including tour managers and agents that didn't pay them. The tour was also notable because of what some described as a grotesque stage show, blurring the lines between music and performance art. Ogre told the San Francisco Examiner, "The things we do might scare or disgust some people, but will always leave them thinking." The band's albums up until this point had fared pretty well on college radio and made some impressions on the dance charts. In 1987, Skinny Puppy released Cleanse, Fold, and Manipulate, a divergence in the band's lyrical themes, focusing on more timely subjects. The lyrics were particularly dark on this album, exploring more socially and politically conscious topics like the Vietnam War, the AIDS epidemic, and self-harm. Ogre told the Fort Lauderdale News, "Our music isn't satanic in any way. What can I say about it? I write it from a raw experience. I have a lot of thoughts in my head, so I express them." First Aid dealt with the AIDS epidemic of the 80s, while post-traumatic stress syndrome, experienced by many Vietnam vets, was tackled in the song Second Tooth. The song Addiction was released as a single, further establishing the band's growing reputation in alternative music circles. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.